Hello and welcome to Mind Matters, Life and Beyond, a brand new podcast by Digit Life Insurance. In the first episode of our podcast, we're going to be talking about modern day mental health, where we touch upon financial security and its relationship with our mental health. We'll also look into how financial literacy helps our mental health, and then we'll also touch upon topics of grief and gentle ways of coping with it. Okay, so as our first guest today, we have with us Shravanthi Venkatesh, who's a psychotherapist and a drama therapist. Hi, Shravanthi.
Hi, Huda.
How are you doing today?
Good, good.
To start off with, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and especially the niche that you work in, which is drama therapy? I think many people wouldn't know about this, so can you just throw some light on it?
Yeah, sure. So, drama therapy is a medium where we use a lot of art modalities within the space of psychotherapy. So, we use movement, we use dance, we use theater, as well as different kind of visual art mediums, as well as music to, bring about different kinds of insight and also give experiences that may not have words, um, give them that space and validation to, you know, be expressed by that person. So, yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you really got into this?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I think for me, coming into mental health was a process of elimination. It was based on what I didn't want to do that I found myself in mental health. But I also realized it was something that I found very relatable, something that I myself could find a lot of personal growth in and found a way to understand myself. And I think that's how that interest towards mental health started growing. Uh, I took up psychology in my bachelor's, took up my clinical psychology in my master's. And after some time, I realized I wanted to move more towards something that was artistic, more colorful, something that really had elements of me. And I'm also an actor on the side. So, just allowing all those aspects of my personality to manifest in my professional life. I found myself going to drama therapy, and now I'm a drama therapist as well. So, yeah.
And do you think that this form of therapy kind of makes it easier? I mean, mental health and talking about it, or even people accepting that they have problems, they don't, I mean, it's not been easy in the society. So, do you think this kind of destigmatizes it in a way?
Which part?
Drama therapy, does it make it more easy for people to come to terms with it or deal with it?
I think the way drama therapy helps is it doesn't look at mental health as a problem. And I think that itself is really beautiful. And so much about the expressive arts allows us to access things about ourselves that are just very everyday, things that we tend to, I think, ignore and avoid. It allows us to tap into our creativity. It allows us to really tap into a very unique expression and validates that unique expression, right? And so I think it allows us to look at things from a lifestyle perspective rather than looking at things as how is this a problem, right? How is this, but rather as an outcome of a number of situations, right? And I think ultimately that's what we are all sitting with when it comes to any form of health, whether it's our physical health, whether it's our mental health. It's ultimately consequences of situations given to us in our lives, a lot of which we don't have control over. And within the space of the arts, within the space of drama, it just allows us to see it as outcomes and how we can hold that outcome in the kindest, most colorful perspective that's, really empowering in a lot of ways. And at the same time, there's a lot of joy, but there's a lot of sorrow, and there's space for everything in between as well. So, yeah.
Although, like, I mean, I wanted to get into this, the grief part a little later, but a thought that came into my mind is so a lot of times we have seen there are a lot of artists, writers who have come up with their maybe their best of works when going through something in their life. Do you see that in your work as well? That people, I mean, like you were saying, it's an outcome. So, maybe the different situations in people's life really, and the creativity really just helps them create and come up with something. How does that work? And why is it that we see so many artists? I mean, there's even I think in many movies there are references to it, like in the movie Rockstar. They say, unless you don't go through some pain, you won't be able to create art. So, do you see that in your experience with uh, as a drama therapist too? That how does this really intertwine?
Right. I think just to sort of address maybe a perception of drama therapy is that often people think it's performative, in the sense there's a performance aspect to it because of the word drama. And that's actually not what it is. Um, the focus is the internal experience the person has while creating a form of art or while interacting with a form of art, right? And so the focus is on the creating. And so for a person to tap into that space, they have to tap into an internal experience. And what that allows is it allows for people to really, one is pay attention to feelings, become really present with what's going on in their lives, and then express those bits. Whereas I think otherwise, what tends to happen is we look at how can we get on with our lives by distracting ourselves? How can we get on with work? How can we get on with all these different aspects that could take us away from the painful experience? That could probably, make it look like we need to fit in to something. Whereas when we tap into a creative experience, it allows us to really access the nuanced reality that each one of us uniquely face, right? And find complete validation in how that experience matters to us, right? And in that way, I think it allows for us to communicate that in a way that only we can understand. And it allows another person to witness that experience, right? And that becomes the really healing space, is when I'm able to show exactly how something feels, and when somebody is able to be present and say, oh, I see it, right? I see what you're going through. What you're going through really matters. What you're going through is important. Yeah, so one thing is it allows a person to express themselves in more than one way. It allows people to use textures, to use music, to use their bodies,
Yeah.
and to describe situations, to describe how they feel. And then the other aspect of it is being witnessed in that space, right? And a lot of the healing is in the sharing
Yeah.
and being witnessed and having that pain be seen. And it's not just pain, but even having the wins be seen, having those moments where you just don't know what's going on, and that lack of clarity being seen and really validated, saying, this is a relatable experience. Or even if it's not relatable, it's a different experience, but I see you. I
Yeah.
see you going through this particular kind of experience. So there's a lot of healing that comes from that space of creation,
Yeah.
and that particular creation being witnessed by somebody else, by a community, by a group of people, by your friends, but within therapy, it is this particular person or a group of people who are there together for something, to say, hey, I see what you're going through and I'm present for it. So I think that's what really makes it quite healing.
So, I mean, you were talking about, the misconception or the myth that people have about drama therapy. Um, can you tell me also what is the myth that people have about therapy in general, and that you would like to break?
Yeah, I think it comes down to some aspect of time and finance when it comes to therapy. therapy. And I think that is where people hesitate to invest in themselves, right? Because ultimately it comes down to this: it takes so much of money, it takes so much of time. I want something quicker, right? I want to feel better faster, so I want a quick fix, you know. And so I think something that I'd like to really and focus on here is it. And this is actually something I've seen in a movie dialogue by Salma Hayek, and I felt like I really, really resonated with it. Is when she says, "It takes such little time to break something, but try repairing it, try fixing it, try healing something, and that takes so much of time." Right? And that's essentially what a therapeutic process is. That's a healing process is it's so easy to go through a bad experience and to be wounded by that bad experience. It takes a really short span of time to break something inside, but to put it back together, to use that information to grieve it, to really allow yourself to feel the pain, and then decide that you want something better for yourself and actively work towards that, takes time and effort and energy, and somebody who is able to be with you in that process, be really present to what you're going through, and to also help you feel anchored when you're going through these periods of not knowing what you want to do, not knowing who you are without this experience, not knowing who you want to become after this experience, right? All of that takes so much of time and expertise and a honed skill, as well as the therapist's own personal experience with pain and how they've dealt with it. There's so much of complexity and beauty in that space. My question is always, don't you think you're worth that effort? Don't you think you're worth that time? Don't you think you're worth giving yourself that chance to experience something different from pain? You know?
That's pretty interesting. Reminds me of, so there was someone I know who went for therapy for the first time, and they were like, it's just talking. Why do I have to do this? Like, why do I have to go so many times just to talk? Like, there's nothing there. And this whole thing about time and effort. So this generation, like, I think in today's generation, people are understanding mental health a lot more. But there's also another thing where this generation is very used to quick fixes in general. We want everything really fast because you are in this, like Gen Z is born in the digital generation, right? You're getting your groceries in under 10 minutes. You want everything quick. You are on social media, getting validation quickly. So, how does this kind of, how does, like, on one side, we are, um, mental health is being normalized. People are talking about this generation is taking it seriously, but at the same time, where it's also a generation that wants everything very quickly. So, does that like kind of stress them out, or I'm not sure? Like Gen Z is also known to be. There are a lot of studies uh, that they are very stressed, and it's because of all of this because of this digital age that we are in. They're also like they're known to be very stressed compared to the generations before. Uh, so yeah, your thoughts on this?
Right.
Yeah.
Um, I would say that Gen Z is responding to the world around them, because the world around them is fast paced. The world around them is crumbling in terms of uh, politics, in terms of climate, in terms of leadership, in terms of governance, right? You are seeing that the systems around them are not proving to be reliable, right? And at the same time, the way these systems placate and try to soothe them or distract people is through instant gratification, right? And so you look, it's really interesting how that works is that you can see how instant gratification is sold as something that will solve your problem, right? And when you're really helpless in that state, you're going to take it as, okay, this is an available solution, so let me try it. And what I realize is they realize that it's not helping, and then they come for therapy. And we have to, and that's when, we sit down and we work with that myth of instant gratification, right? And I think the only way people can see how instant gratification is not the way is when they experience that it's not the way, right? And being with them through that experience is a lot of the work, right? Is getting them to slow down, getting them to see that, even though things are sold to them saying, oh, look at this, be cured in 6 sessions, and, go for this and get a qualification in this and in 2 weeks or whatever it is, bringing them back to the experience of it, bringing them back to prioritizing their experience of their life, bringing them back to looking at how they have a lot more autonomy than is told to them, right? I think those are parts of the process that at least I notice in the kind of work that I do. Is everybody tells them something? Yes, it's a quick, fast paced world. They go through it believing it, and then they realize it's not necessarily true. And the ones who are ready for it come in, and they welcome a new experience. Of course, there's a lot of hardship in that process, and there's a lot of time, but eventually it comes down to the same things, that has been proven time and time again, that time, community, space, silence, stillness, art, nature, all of these things ultimately become the same medicine that has proven time and time again to really work. So it's a process.
Yeah. And in your experience with working with younger, you know, like what you said, the Gen Z generation, um, do you also see that they are stressed about, I mean, what are the common things that they're stressed about? And is finances one of them? Because I was recently reading a study that talks about how Gen Z and even millennials have a lot of their stressors also is dealing with finances compared to the baby boomer generation. They were known to be a little more financially secure in some ways, and I think they maybe they were doing better for themselves at the age that they were in versus what today's generation they feel like they are not doing as well as maybe their parents were doing at their age, or they're like not as sorted as what their parents were, and they're not that financially secure. So is this something that you've experienced with, finances being a stressor in this generation?
Yes. I think it's not just Gen Z. I think a lot of us also sit with that stress and financial stress. I think financial stress is one of the biggest sources of trauma that we are experiencing right now. And I think the focus is Gen Z and millennials, but I would say every generation that exists right now is facing the brunt of financial stress, right? And that is also the way the world is at the moment, is we are tied into a system that it you can't survive without a double income household, and when you're looking at whatever we consider luxury nowadays, right? uh, we're looking at the cost of that being quite high. Or even if you do want to move to an urban space, right? The cost of moving to an urban space is really, really I think the cost of moving to an urban space is more on a lifestyle basis, on the expenditure on an everyday basis, right? Can be so stressful because it's not just where you live, it's the social circle you're hanging out with, and your contemporaries and your peer and what they're affording, and also the insistence of trips abroad, and making sure that you're abreast with your social category, right? And I think that really gives rise to a lot of stress because we're undeniably also in an economic system that's towards capitalism, that also kind of focuses on you being engaged with that particular economic system. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of financial stress, and we are people who depend on society, right, for our growth, for our existence. And so it becomes really important for us to keep up with the people around us. Friendships are important, our family systems are important, our societies are important to us. So I think we tend to really take it quite lightly when we tell people, no, focus on your life. It's only your life. And that's not entirely true. Um, our lives are made up of the lives we share our lives with, right? And if their lifestyles are also going to be a particular way, or we're used to a particular kind of lifestyle, then we're going to be dependent to a large degree on those decisions, to keep up with them. Because, togetherness, being part of something, a sense of belonging, ultimately becomes really important for us. And I think there's generally the sense of this concept of self-love that has been really, taken from somewhere and it's spiraled out of control. Um, I really find it very interesting how the concept of self love is being sold to people right now. But here I think we have to take into consideration how finances are a huge part of people's lives, and we have to take that seriously. And it ties into mental health because you can see how stressed people are when they're not able to go on a holiday with their friends group, right? Or when right now, let's say even parents, they want to put their kids in a particular kind of school, right? Or when it comes to taking care of their parents and the health conditions and the medications for chronic disorders, the kind of financial stress that goes into planning their lives, leisure, children, parents, their own health. Um, I mean, if I have to list it out, I mean, as well as things like commodities like rent, your electricity, your Netflix account, or whatever it is. I mean, it just piles up and piles up and piles up, and the source of it's a huge source of stress, right? So it does add, and it's your everyday. You're living and breathing this. You're living and breathing this, and if you are going to be in a part of town where, and it's not even a luxury commodity, like let's say for women, it's safety. If women have to live in a safe place, they have to pay more, right? And if they have to have access to menstrual products, good menstrual products, that is also something that you know uh, they have to spend out of their pockets for, and it's the pink tax is there, right? And so you're really looking at how so many of these things that we consider basic are in the luxury taxed space, right? And so obviously you're going to have these accumulate and cause financial stress, because also there's finance is a source of independence, right? Your decisions, your autonomy. And if it comes down to that, then basically finance determines whether you're going to be able to make choices for yourself or somebody's going to be making those choices for you, or it determines whether you get access to good quality stuff versus compromising on your health and well-being, right? There are big, big consequences when it comes to finance, and that obviously is going to play on your mental health. in a really big way.
I mean, there was a recent post going around on social how people used to say money doesn't buy happiness, but that like it buys you freedom. And I think that's, I mean, once you have freedom, then a lot of your stress is reduced because of that independence and that freedom. So how would you say if someone has to, I mean, everyone is coping with, financial stress, like you said, it doesn't matter which generation they're from. In fact, today, you were talking about how people now also have, there are double income. Now, both partners are usually working now compared to the generations before. So the financial stress is kind of also shared. First, it was maybe the man only who was going, the man of the family, but now it is kind of shared, or it's also the woman of the family who is involved in these decisions now. Um, how would you say, how does someone deal or cope with this kind of stress? You were talking about, how dealing with things means understanding. So how would it work when it comes to your finances? How do you cope with uh, relieving some of the stress that comes with it? Because if we are living and breathing with so many stresses in our life.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think something that we're not taught in school, or in unless we take it as an elective, right, is how important personal finance is to us,
Exactly.
right? And when we're looking at the concept of personal finance, we're just looking at getting a job that's well paying,
Yeah.
right? And I think this is something that really is. Uh, it occurred to me now when it's something that's also emerging for myself is I think one thing that I really thought of is how long do I want to keep working, right? Because we've been kind of sold this idea that we have to, once we graduate college or we complete our education, we get a job, and then we work for 40 years, and, and then we retire. And that's kind of the lifestyle that's been told that yes, this is how it is,
Yeah.
right? And it's so interesting how none of us have been told that we have an option where we get to really celebrate rest. We're never ever told that. We get to celebrate rest, we get to celebrate health, we get to celebrate relationships. I just realized like we have never been told to prioritize any of these things. And a huge part in being able to do these things is being able to be financially secure, right? For us to have some sort of understanding how the financial world works, I don't think majority of us even are exposed to it. The fact that okay, we get a job, but then how do we handle income? How do we handle savings? What is the kind of mentality that we need to have? Uh, or when it comes to multiple income streams, passive and active income streams, how do we plan for health? How do we plan for long-term lifestyle decisions? I just realized we don't have any kind of we don't have any kind of easy access to that basic information. And I think really late in life, we realize, oh no,
I should have done this before.
I've done this before. Why didn't I buy a house at 18? You know? Um, or why didn't I start investing really early? Or, oh, there's something called mutual funds. There's something called insurance. And I think just the idea of how finance works, because I think for us, the idea of finance that we've been told as children is you have a piggy bank and you put money in that piggy bank and you'll be sorted, right? And then you, much later in life, you're just like, oh no, that's not entirely how the world works. So I think it's really beginning to understand or having access to these kinds of this kind of education itself, and it requires a perspective, to have a certain perspective. And I think finance is something that's seen as numbers. It's not seen as lifestyle. It's always seen as power, people in suits and Wall Street and people who are really business-like, right?
Kind of seen as like this is a man's job. This is like,
Yeah.
because I think that's what it may have been for previous generations. But actually, I mean, there was this thing at how women, even though in previous generation maybe they didn't work, but they were actually very good with their money, whatever they saved. But somehow there is this perception that finance is for men and women don't get it.
Yeah.
And yeah, but that's not, I mean, it's changing in the world that we are in.
I think it was always present. It's just that the devaluing of women's labor, is what makes that space look like it's a male dominated space. When in fact, you're looking at handling of resources, paying of bills, knowing how to manage money, re- knowing how to stash away money, right? While also making sure bills are being paid. Uh, that was essentially the woman's job, right? To keep the ship running, right? But there's a real devaluing of that as, oh, she's just a housewife, right? But that housewife is running this huge ship with multiple family members. Everybody's health, everybody's food intake, everybody's mental health was essentially her job, and being the supportive partner and all of these things. And if you actually see how much labor that actually is, there's no holiday to it. um, and it's literally how this person is that determines everyone else's health. I mean, it's huge, right? And so I think women are actually really good with money. They have all the right ideas about money, because to them, money isn't status, money is a resource, as opposed to somebody who's working who looks at money as, this is my identity, right? And that's generally within the male dominated space. Is money is seen as, this is how much money I get home. I'm able to maintain my family. What do I do with that money as a life resource is ultimately what comes within the woman's hands, right? But it's really interesting how that shifts is when women come to investing. That's when it's almost like the message given to women. The mentality is, you can't handle big money. Yeah. So we can't give you this money, right? And it's also an internalized thing. Like even women hold that thing is, oh, it's outside the house. Yeah. So if it's outside the house, then it's very scary, right? And I can easily say that I myself am a person who struggles to constantly bring myself out of that headspace, and go into understanding how, what to do with my money and where can I put it, and make informed decisions, and to make a decision, with regard to a bank, with regard to stocks, and with regard to mutual funds or whatever it is. I find it extremely scary. But actually, I possess quite a lot of the better understanding of what to do with money as a life resource. And I see this in all the women around me, right? That understanding of what to do with it rather than it being tied to their identity, women really know how to not make it about themselves. you know yeah. So, but it is that real fear to engage with money that becomes the trauma, right? The stress of it. What does it mean for a woman to want money, right? What does that mean about her? An ambitious woman has always been sold as an idea of a threatening woman, vilified in a lot of storylines. Just because she wants more, just because she desires security, just because she desires an identity. So I think a lot of that is vilified because money equals power, money is desire, money is empowerment, money is independence. And these are all the tropes of a villain in a soap opera, right? The villain woman character. So I think in that way, it causes a lot of stress when women are now coming into the workforce and saying, okay, now I'm getting money. Now, what do I do with it? Yeah. How do I handle it? right? And I see that a lot in clients as well. Is there's generally this pressure to look at money as a space where I have to make sure that I'm thinking of everyone else. And I'm putting that money for my family. And there's very little consideration that the woman has for herself and her personal growth and her personal desires. That's something that's so natural to see, unfortunately, you know. And I really hope that changes. And it is shifting. But that space between women and finance is something that really, really needs working on.
And when I just want to also get back into the fact, I mean, whether they're men or women, or whether it's any generation, then what are some practical um, tips you can give to someone who is probably going through financial stress? How do they navigate through it?
Right.
Because it's kind of different from maybe other stressors. So how does someone um, cope with this?
Oof. It's interesting you're asking the mental health professional for this. I think in terms of mental health,
Yeah.
it's really counterintuitively, it's to really look at your living situation, is what I really see helps, is meeting the stressor, you know, as is what is it in this environment that's causing stress. One is it that you have an idea of finance,
Mhm.
a particular kind of finance that's safe and not safe, right? And is that what's actually going on?
Mm.
Because a lot of the times, financial stress is something to do with a personal experience, right? Now, if a person feels very secure with handling finance, then they know what to do with it, right? And they know how to manage it. They know how to allocate or cut back when things are tight. And there's no stress around it. So, this financial stress, one, could be something that's based on a personal experience that's very entrenched with their history with finance, right? Now, if people have grown up in a space where they didn't have access to it, then money itself can be overwhelming, right? Whether it's little or a lot, just the presence of money can give rise to a lot of stress, because at one point of time, it was a huge cause of stress. If you're coming from a background where there were a lot of family fights around money, right? And family feuds, like, tell me one family that doesn't have the family feud, right? And so the kind of experience that people have around that is, just because you had money, you were the source or you were targeted, right? That means having money could mean a bad thing, because people then pick up fights with me, or they point out to me that because you have the money, it's very unfair. You know, the kind of history people come with regard to finance makes more of a difference than the finance itself, right? And so to really understand your relationship to money, right? Is it an accurate picture? Is it that I'm actually stressed? Do I actually not have money? Or is it that money as such is stressful for me because of these different incidences? Because money is a real tool to control people, right? And generally, in a lot of households, people were held at ransom to money, right? Either they were allowed to do something, um, or something that they really wanted to do was taken away. And if that required money, right, then it was used as a tool to control people in the house, right? Keep the discipline or keep the order of the house or things like that. So, to really notice what is your personal relationship to money, and to also be okay with the fact that you could be really stressed and that takes you to very unpleasant places. but also understand that, that requires a lot of work and healing for you to be okay with money just as a concept, money just as a resource, money just as a tool, right? And to see if it's actually about that or if it is the actual lack of the resource.
Or sometimes, do you think sometimes also could seems a little like you said it, people are just like, I don't know what this even means, or not knowing um the complexities of it can also stress you out. Like, oh, I don't know anything about this, and you just like stress about it or you run away from it.
Yeah.
So is it just understanding money as well? Like, for example, I mean, so in India, the financial literacy is one of the lowest.
Yes.
So maybe is that, I mean, does that also have a role to play that, that also stresses people out because they don't know,
Hmm?
like, they don't know how money works.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that can just stress you out because you don't know
absolutely.
the uncertainty of it.
100%, right? But again, it goes back to this history you have with money, right? Because if money has been a space or finance has been a space that's demonized,
Yeah.
right, then you're not going to want to have anything to do with it. And if you actually look at the space of virtue, right, all those spaces of virtue look at money as something that corrupts. And that's tend to, like, I'm going to try and rephrase that, but that's also the outlook most storylines have about money, right? Money damages, money breaks, money causes conflict, money. But nowhere has it been taught to look at ourselves with relation to money in a healthy way. We're only told the ways money doesn't help us or money doesn't help relationships. But neither are people telling us how we should look at money, right? Nobody's being taught to look at money in a healthy way, in a balanced way, right? Nobody's being told what is okay. Everybody's told what's not okay, right? And so there's generally this vilification of everything to do with finance. But actually, it's only very recently now that I've started talking to people, and some of my very close friends, they only deal with money because that's their interest. They explain it to me like a game, right? They're like, money is a game. And when they told it to me like that, it was such a different perspective, right? Is they say you're literally playing a game where you're given or you have a certain amount of money and now you have to decide what to do with it. And you also get some prizes, and you get some gifts and if you plan it really well, then you can actually, this game of life, you have like a really good chance of living a good life, but you got to really play smart. Right? And when people were able to explain it to me that way, it really flipped how to look at money. Like they literally said, look at it as a game, right? Look at it as something that gets you stuff that you need and maybe then what you want, right? It gets you health, it gets you security, all of these things. Um, and that really shifted my perspective around money, but it also brought to my understanding how how my personal relationship with money also makes me really scared of money. It was really interesting for me to hold both parts of it, you know. So I would say that is something that would be really helpful for people to begin to look at. One is as a life resource, but also that the entire system of finance is circulating, not entirely stashing it away. Knowing what to do with it means if you're going to put money with an insurance, then if that means like you're not giving away the money ultimately comes back to you. If you're putting it in a deposit, it comes back to you. So, kind of allowing people to understand the landscape of money then becomes allows people to understand this is how I can think about money. And that becomes really soothing because when there's clarity, then people understand exactly how to position themselves with regard to the topic. And that itself becomes very soothing, right? It's only when there is that unpredictability or it's completely in the unknown that you're imagining the worst. You don't have a destination to go to. You don't have a defined place, right? And then then you're just imagining the worst, and your imagination can take you to infinite levels of distress, right?
I think something interesting which you said is like, think of it in a balanced way. So I think in society, we sort of like if somebody says very rich or like people just they don't think about who that person is. Otherwise, they're like, oh yeah, they're very rich or they're loaded or whatever. And so I think the way we look at it is in very extreme situation, and maybe we need to just like normalize it, and it's just a part of life. And yeah, it's like any other thing in your life, right? It's just part of life, and it's not something that which only some people get or only some people understand. It's part of everyone's life. Everyone needs to get it like you live and get other parts of your life. And I think that's maybe that's how we can balance it rather than looking at it like something that is not part of everyday life.
I think a big part of that is exercising how to work with money, right? Because we can't just tell people, and that's not how we learn as humans. That's not how we learn. We learn with experience, right? And a lot of the time, if you notice, the people who are really good at money are the people who possibly were with parents who handled money a particular way, right? So they received that kind of guidance. They were not all alone. So money wasn't scary. They saw their parents, whoever was handling the money, they saw them handling it in a very calm way, right? And so they learn from that. They learn by watching somebody handle it in a calm way. They learn when there's space to be curious about it, right? And say, why do you do this and why not that? Why do you make this particular kind of decision in your investments, and why do you not maybe invest in something else? But it's the real presence of that person who can be calm around money that makes all the difference, right? Because that is essentially how all of us learn. Even if you were to think about the things that you handle in terms of conflict very calmly, was it because you were all alone and you learned how to handle that conflict? Or was it because you saw somebody handling a similar conflict very calmly and you learned how to do it in that way, right? A lot of the times when we have somebody who teach who handles it in a very calm way, who handles it in a very balanced way, and we have that gift to be in the presence of that person while you're doing the same thing, then you realize, oh, it doesn't have to be so scary, right? Because we are people who really lean off of each other's energy. We learn off of it, right? And that's essentially how we develop of throughout our lives. It's not just in childhood, it's maximum in childhood, but throughout our lives, we depend on the people around us.
What about the opposite? Like you were saying, if someone is calm, but what if it is the opposite? They're seeing that, okay, maybe they're not calm, and then you realize, okay, I don't want to be like that. Yes. So then you act like very consciously do the opposite thing.
Yeah, that's also so true. That's also really true. But at the same time, um, when the people I think that we're addressing here are the people who have a really hard time, right? Because it is kind of like having a mentor, right? Why do we have mentors? To help show us the way, right? And that person becomes really important in soothing us, in grounding us, in helping us understand that. And that mentor becomes, they may not tell us how to do things, but just their mere presence while we're navigating a tough situation becomes the thing that's regulating for a person, right? It's not so much they did it this way, so I have to do it this way, but it's just the fact I'm not alone in this space. And I'm with somebody who I can rely on. I'm with somebody who can hold me when I get really stressed out. I'm with somebody who can calm me down when I get quite flustered or frustrated. That becomes the really important experience while dealing with something very stressful, right?
But what about, what about in a situation where, say, someone doesn't have anyone to lean on, or you're alone in that journey? Then, I mean, how does that sort of work? And has that, have you seen in your experience where people are dealing with these things where they don't have someone to lean on, or they might have even lost someone who they were dependent on, even for, say, their finances or emotionally, anything? So, anything from your experience you'd like to share, and how, um, how they deal with it, say, in drama therapy, then in that process?
Um, I suppose drama therapy would be a tool, right? But I think we mainly see this in the space of death and grief, right? Or especially when there's a chronic illness or a mental illness that is suddenly taken over, you're seeing that somebody else may suddenly have to step in, right? And that becomes a very stressful space. You can see how, like, a lot of people experience extremely harrowing breakdowns, at that point of time, which is also how they find their way to therapy, right? Because they have gone through a pretty overwhelming episode of, either stopping functioning, can't work, very triggered, things like that. And yeah, many of them are all alone. Like, I think during COVID, we saw a lot of that where people just lost so many members of their family, and or I think there were many people who lost their parents very young, and suddenly they had to deal with the legalities, the financial systems, inheritance, and all of these things that they had to deal with. And it was really overwhelming. And at that point of time, we really had to, when they did come to us for therapy, these were people who had resources like finance. They already knew that they could access. So, in that way, they had something going for them, right? And I can't say about people who were just didn't have any understanding of it because I never got to meet them. But many people who did come went through something really, really harrowing. But we became that, like, we created that space to navigate that. Or within a therapeutic space that at least I create with my clients, I try to look at how do we think of who we go to in a time of stress? How do we begin to connect? How do we not isolate ourselves? Right? Because connection is really what brings us out of very dark places, right? And I think being alone, those who are really, really alone, well, then they wouldn't have come to me because they would have been alone. Um, they become really creative. They become really creative and they power through. They really power through. But is it a stress free experience? No, not all the time, right? Uh, a lot of the times, if they have had a wonderful support system through their growing up years, they learn to handle big events all right, right? And so that becomes something that's really anchoring. But at the same time, if they've not had that kind of exposure, they have a pretty difficult time. Yeah.
And I mean, since we're talking about grief, even when even I mean, whether it is the loss of a family member or a loved one, uh, people also go through grief in other stages of their life, right? So whether it is dealing with loss or any other stage of your life, like you mentioned, when someone is uh, you know taking care of someone with a chronic illness and so on, what are some ways that, what are some gentle ways of coping with that grief? uh, yeah, could you share some insights on that?
This is, I'm just going to clarify, this is not entirely to do with death.
Yeah, just any kind of grief which is more long term, say, for example, caring for a person who has chronic illness, or dealing with the loss of a loved one.
Right. I think when it comes to grief and loss, just like you mentioned, it's really useful to keep in mind that grief and loss is not only around death, but it is quite a personal process of what you are losing in a situation, right? And that could be a lot of things. And it could even be in very happy occasions, right? Grief can surface in very happy occasions where you get a promotion or you're shifting jobs to a better paying job, let's say. You still have grief coming up there because you're losing your team, your coworker who you sat next to every day, a sense of stability, predictability, a place that was once very warm, right? So grief and loss is something that's to do with a very internal sense of what an individual is losing. And it is to make space for that. And how do I think that's also really, I think what's really missing in a lot of spaces is to be able to accept that these spaces are painful, right? And there's generally a fear of pain in these spaces. And I think making space for that pain, because that pain is coming from losing something that there was a lot of affection and warmth and attachment to, right? I think first and foremost would be to acknowledge that there were all these really strong, wonderful feelings there, right? Um, the second would be, yeah, so I think when it comes to grief and loss, it's really important to understand that it's a very personal process. And grief and loss is actually about what you as an individual have lost, as well as what you as a community may have lost, right? And they're two separate experiences, right? And so it can feel like there's a lot of emotions, and sometimes it can feel like you're the only one going through a particular kind of grief, but there may be some elements that others can relate to, and to really make space for that complexity, right? That maybe not everybody is going to understand the exact experience of your grief. And that's okay. It doesn't make yours less valid, right? At the same time, also seeing the parts that you can share with others so that you're not closing yourself off. The some of the other things that we really experience during grief is rage and anger at just how powerless we are in a certain situation at times. When things have to change, or when circumstances handed us a situation that's maybe, grounded us, made us leave our jobs, made us move away, uh, have us tied to the house, taking care of somebody. Um, there's a huge loss of your freedom, that goes into it. At the same time, also wanting to care for this person, but that also becomes quite frustrating, so there's so many emotions, but to constantly make space for those emotions to come up, to make sure you're not cutting yourself off, to have people you can go to have communities that you can go to, right? Where you can express this, you can develop other kinds of identities, right? Those are really, really important to handle that grief, because grief can feel very overwhelming. Grief is very overwhelming, right? The third thing would be everybody grieves differently, right? And that's partly to do with what they're allowed to do in in that moment, as well as what has been comfortable for them to do while handling different kinds of stressful situations. So some people may go head on into work and may not think about this situation causing grief. And some people might actually just become completely dysfunctional and handle the emotions head on. And at the same, and kind of go out of functioning for some time, but you actually see that they will come back after processing a lot of the emotions. They'll come back to a sense of functioning and engaging with people around them, right? Everybody processes it differently. And grief takes its time. Grief will is not as much as people say 1 year is how you grieve and it's the amount of time you take to grieve. It's not entirely true. I myself have grieved 11 years over something, right? Over someone, right? And I have understood that luckily I'm a person who understands that that's how grief works. But I also understand some people give themselves a really hard time during grief, saying, 1 year's up, why am I still sad about this? Why am I still clinging on to this? Uh, why am I still sad about this person not being there when everybody around me seems to be moving on with their lives? Right? There's so many thoughts about how grief should work. And that's not how grief works at all. And so much of it is determined by our personal circumstance. Like if maybe we've not had the space to process our grief. Maybe we've had to take care of children. Maybe we've had to take care of aged parents. Maybe we've got our own stuff going on at that point of time. And, that's not the space for grief where grief can manifest, right? So I think to really honor your personal experiences, to say, if this is what I can do now, this is what I can do. Um, Everything else will have to wait, maybe. And that is how it is. And that's all I can do for now, right? To really allow that space without judgment. I think that's really hard. It's a honed skill. But if one can tap into that and constantly remind themselves, my grief will be different from other people's grief. Everybody, what people show on the outside is not the entire truth. Not everybody's comfortable wearing their grief on their sleeve. And if I need to put on a mask, let me put on a mask because that's helping me in some way, right? There will be certain people I will be safe with when I express my grief. Let me be aware of who those people are and consciously access these people. And if I'm not safe around somebody, I won't share my grief. I think those are some ways where we can really, really at least honor ourselves in the space of grief.
So I think what it essentially is that I think one thing that I feel like people have a misconception on is that people feel like grief looks a certain way, or there's only one way of like it. They don't realize it can be different for different people and different for different experiences even, and can also be very different for same male and female, and also depending on the life stage that you are in, right? Pretty much like I think most things in our life, it's not always like very straightforward. It is more nuanced than that. So yeah, on that note, I think this brings us to the end of our podcast for the first episode. And thank you so much for talking with us. This was really insightful and really deep conversation about everything. And I wish we could speak longer, but we do that after the episode then. Um, yeah, thank you so much for your time today.
And thank you for entertaining the depth.
Thank you, ManoShala, for making this collaboration possible. ManoShala is a mental health and wellness company dealing with core concerns of relationships, loneliness, anxiety, depression, and childhood trauma. They provide affordable and credible therapists, instant relaxation help, and group wellness solutions in India for employees and individuals. Download the app and talk to them for a 20-minute free assessment.
So, I'm Shravanthi Venkatesh. I'm a psychotherapist and a drama therapist with about 9 years' experience within the field of mental health, and I'm based out of Bangalore. I consult for ManoShala, and I also run my own mental health practice, which is called Swaha Space. You can find us on Instagram at Swaha Space _therapy. And we put up a lot of videos, and you can also contact me regarding any doubts, workshops, or any kind of collaboration you look forward to. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to our first episode. Let us know what you thought about it and any recommendations for our future episodes. And for more updates, follow us on our social media channels at Digit Life Insurance on Instagram and YouTube.